If you want another clue about why conspiracy theorists believe what they do, it's this. In 20 years, there has only ever been one conspiracy theory that I got my dad to walk back on. It was the summer of 2011, when my dad sat me down and showed me a series of conspiracy rumor mills saying that Barack Obama's birth certificate was fake. The clincher was that the PDF released by the administration had layers, like editing layers in Photoshop. There were layers, so to speak, which is kind of weird if you don't know how these things work. My dad didn't, but I was editor-in-chief of my university's newspaper at the time, so I knew something about Adobe. And I could tell that these layers made no sense as something that a secret digital forger would use. But they would, perhaps, make sense to a fancy scanner programmed to identify text and separate it into different layers in the image file. That evening, I spent 2 hours grinding out the most satisfyingly savage takedown of a conspiracy theory I've ever done. And my dad finally conceded that, okay, maybe the birth certificate is real and Obama was born in the United States. But that didn't change the fact that the big banks put him in office as a puppet who would bail them out after the 2008 financial crisis. With that, my dad hollowed my victory into a brittle, crumbling husk. I had won the debate over whether or not the birth certificate was fake, but I didn't realize that I had forfeited the debate over whether Obama was a puppet of the banks, or whether elite institutions are plotting world events to control our lives, or whether we are innocent and they are evil. This is part 2 of my video essay series covering everything I've learned in the last 20 years of dealing with paranoid extremism in my family, and the last year of trying to de-radicalize my dad. Where part 1 was about understanding conspiracy belief as a whole, this will be more for people who have a paranoid extremist in their lives that they're hoping to rebuild a relationship with, and what they need to understand. This is also going to draw a lot from the first essay, so you should probably watch that first to get the most out of this. And especially make sure you get to the part where I explain that you might be able to help someone in your life. Might. But you have to know that most of them will not come back to reality. At least not while the real world is a giant mess of anxious uncertainty and disinformation algorithms. Because while it has often worked for my dad, it also hasn't. And it especially isn't right now as we're approaching the next climax in the global crisis of truth and democracy. If you want a list of tips and guidance, you can find that at the chapter mark around the middle of the video. But 99% of what you need to do is to really internalize what it means to believe conspiracy theories. I would strongly encourage you to watch the series until conspiracy belief feels less like a bizarre fever dream and more like a sad, painful, and disturbing, but understandable part of the human condition. Once you're there, you'll know more about what to do than any list of tips can tell you. And if you're not there yet, the tips might not make sense anyway. So this is still going to be an advice essay, if a complex and introspective one. And I think it can be helpful as it draws from years of success and failure. Starting with my failure in 2011, when I didn't know something that I am still writing about so I can fully know it myself. You will never, ever be able to debate someone out of conspiracy theories. The way people around here say it is that you can't logic someone out of a belief they didn't logic themselves into. Which is true, but stopping there ignores the fact that none of us logic our way into believing anything. We trust our way into it. I'm on the quad here at ISU because after coming back from being AWOL during the Vietnam War, this is where my dad ended up. I grew up just a few miles away from here, but this isn't actually where I went to school. This is where my dad went back in the 80s when he was about my age now, I guess. It's Sunday afternoon, so there's not many students around, but there's a good chance that the ones who are know something about who my dad is. Because every year, on September 11, he tries to take his conspiracy theories IRL to demonstrate on campus. He comes with a sandwich board and a lawn chair, and he just kind of sits and makes himself available to be seen and have pictures taken of him and get into debates with college students. It's nothing personal against the school. He actually really values his education even now. Really the problem for him, and I think he'd agree with this, is that institutions of higher education like this are mini societies of trust. Everyone here is learning and creating new knowledge by trusting the people around them and before them. They're also being skeptical because everyone here is allowed to challenge beliefs as long as they can meet the community standards for justifying new beliefs. So even agitating for change is part of the system of maintaining trust. Is it good at it? I mean, not all the time, but it's still way better at it than anywhere else because that's the only way that you can have a community of learning. Being a thoughtful and determined student is great, that'll do so much for you, but if you don't trust the people here, then it doesn't matter if you are the smartest person in the world. You're not gonna learn anything. I'm going to say that again because of how absolutely essential it is to understand. We don't come to believe anything, true or false, through solitary contemplation. Nobody thinks alone. We think with and through each other because we reason, we decide, and we believe through trust. Either we trust people to tell us what's true about the world outside our personal experience, or we trust people when they accept or reject our justifications for our beliefs. This doesn't mean that we have to believe what everyone around us believes, and it really doesn't mean that it's all pointless because we can never know what's true. It's just that we have to trust someone if we're going to believe anything that we can't personally verify, which is basically everything. And to have any kind of a relationship with someone means, in part, trusting their take on our reasoning, which is something we'll get back to. So, no. The conspiracy theorists didn't logic their way into their beliefs. But if we're going to get through to them, we need to know who they trust, who they distrust, and why. Are you ready for another book? Because this one is The Cultic Milieu, edited by Jeffrey Kaplan and Helene Lowe. It's not as fun as The Enigma of Reason, but it's another book I love because it helped explain how my dad went from being an anti-war peace and love hippie to being an anti-Semitic paranoiac. The authors probably wouldn't like me saying this, but the cultic milieu is basically counterculture. And counterculture is a swirling mass of anything that expresses rejection of the mainstream. Things like tattoos, metalheads, crystal healing, astrology, Dungeons and Dragons, at least before 2016. All the different kinds of punk, van life, mail order dietary supplements, gold bugs, cryptocurrency, MLMs, nerdy internet fandoms, stoners, straight edge, cryptid hunters, flat earthers, young earth creationists, quantum woo, witches, sovereign citizens, preppers, millenarians, and I got the word right this time, tent revivals, neo-pagans, new atheists, anarchists, communists, ANCAPs, cults, hippies, and conspiracy theorists. These all look like extremely different things, because they are, but they tend to attract remarkably similar kinds of people who are drawn to them for similar reasons. They're people who distrust mainstream ideas about how to look, how to act, and what to believe. So instead, they form countercultures, groups of people who think with and through each other, who trust each other, more than they do the mainstream. So I was living on the West Coast for a while, working for what you might call a countercultural magazine, and I met this guy through a mutual friend. I didn't spend much time with this guy, but in the time that I did, I found out about everything that he thinks is bullshit. Schools are bullshit, cars are bullshit, definitely organized religion is bullshit, just everything is bullshit. Now, my friend is a science journalist, so at some point evolutionary biology came up, and this guy stopped us to say, evolution is bullshit. And we were like, are you a young earth creationist? And he said no, he wasn't, because religion is bullshit. But he had read these blogs by creationists talking about how they were being censored by mainstream academia and they weren't able to share their theories at places like this. So yes, to him, evolution is bullshit, and that is the cultic milieu. See also Tulsi Gabbard and Kanye West. That's not the case for everyone who dabbles in the cultic milieu, which, to be clear, is everyone. If a couple of your highest order beliefs are that all humans are equal and injustice is wrong, then there's a lot of mainstream bullshit that you're going to reject in favor of countercultural ideas. But there's also a lot of mainstream ideas and institutions that you're going to accept. So how and where you and the conspiracy theorist fit into the cultic milieu, what justifies your trust and distrust, is the second key, after totalitarian certainty, and a much more personal one for understanding what's going on and what to do. Let's start with you. Why should you believe any mainstream news sources? The conspiracy theorists have a point here. Everyone on CNN or NBC or 60 Minutes could be lying to you about everything, and you would never know it. But I would argue that there are, actually, good reasons to trust mainstream journalists and scientists and scholars to give us at least a decent idea of what's going on. The main reason being that diverse communities of trust can only exist with communally enforced standards, what you would call healthy skepticism. If one mainstream journalist reports something, it's almost certainly not a lie, but it's also probably not worth taking seriously yet. If a couple more report on it, then that means an entire ecosystem of incentives is making sure that it's at least true on the facts. If the first journalist was lying, then everyone else is professionally incentivized to call them out. It takes everyone, both holding themselves to and enforcing those standards, to make this work at all. This is what it means to be skeptical. Not trusting any one person spouting their unaccountable beliefs, but trusting a system of professional expectations, and yes, sometimes profit incentives, especially in the case of cable news, among intensely competitive people playing by a set of rules. You know that it can never be the whole story, and everyone will have bias, but healthy skepticism knows that you can't use that as an excuse to believe whoever or whatever you want. Is it a perfect system? Not at all. Are there gaping blind spots? Absolutely, especially where there's profit. Is it, overall, the best and most effective system of rational inquiry humanity has yet devised that can always get better? Yes. And if you don't trust them, you aren't going to learn anything. It's always technically possible that all of the journalists and scientists and scholars are liars. No one will ever be able to prove that wrong, so anyone could choose to be cynical. They can inject into the uncertainty an excuse to distrust the mainstream as long as they're motivated to look for one. And people often gain that motivation when they feel illegitimately rejected by the mainstream. That's why this is also part 2 of what makes all of this so hard. Everyone has countless opportunities to be and feel rejected or judged, whether for a good reason or not. They could feel rejected by the mainstream as a truly and brutally marginalized minority. Or they could feel that the legal protection of minority rights and opportunities is the mainstream rejecting their majority's rightful power. Grievance arises when someone believes the reasons why they've been rejected are illegitimate. Were it the other way around, they would feel ashamed. And I am more convinced every day that there is little with as much power over the human soul as the fear of shame and the high of indignation. The desire to say, it's not my fault, which nothing makes easier than to say it's theirs. The more aggrieved one feels, the less they're going to trust those they believe are rejecting them, thinking them malicious liars or fools, and the more they're going to seek someone who validates their feelings. Someone who tells them, we should trust each other because we are like each other, because we have the same enemy who hates us for who we are. It's not our fault, it's theirs. We are innocent, they are evil. Welcome to Naive Cynicism, the dark side of the cultic milieu. In 2011, my dad trusted me when I rejected the justifications for his new belief. And there have been a few other times like that, mostly in the last year, when I debunked him into doubting the specific beliefs at the bottom of his hierarchy. But all he's ever done is move the goalposts back, further up the hill he plans to die on, further toward the big lie of his totalitarian certainty that he trusts others to tell him about. He trusts them because he has a lifetime of grievance about being abused by his own dad and being thought of as a failure and reflexively hating everyone with authority over him. They tell him that the rejection he's experienced isn't his fault, which is kind of true, and that's what makes it so easy for him to believe that he is innocent, and that he is right to hate the evil ones who rejected him, who judged him. For the conspiracy theorist in your life, anything could drive them to the same place. They could believe that they're special and smart, but that the mainstream has denied them what they deserve. They could feel abandoned by an economic system that destroyed their future with debt they had no choice but to take on. They could feel terrified that if they don't find the right enemies to hate, God will damn them to hell. These are all the same ways that any paranoid extremist finds the groups to whom they want to justify themselves. It's the counterculture that justifies their grievance when the mainstream won't. But I said at the top that I'd made progress. Nowhere near complete success, and often with plenty of progress unraveled, but still progress. Something has worked. When my dad met with me and the family therapist, I didn't realize how telling it was that he chose to start with his childhood and going AWOL and everything else that made him distrust authority. He knew that our conversation wasn't about evidence or even belief. It was about trauma, really. His feelings of betrayal by people who were supposed to protect him. He understands that his life is full of enemies, and that the way to gain his trust is to hate his enemies along with him. But he does trust me, at least in that he doesn't think I'm trying to lie to him about anything, even though I don't hate his enemies. He's even told me a few times over the years that he doesn't actually want me to believe a lot of the things that he believes. He wants me to keep believing most of the mainstream things that I do because he thinks that will give me a happier, better life than he's had. A part of him knows, I am so sure of it, that he understands that his beliefs are weapons and not the reason that he fights. Finally, how can you do it? How have I been doing it? First by remembering that you probably can't, then by asking yourself if you should, then resolving to do what it takes until there's nothing left for you to do. If you aren't a close loved one of the conspiracy theorist, you have no ability whatsoever to deprogram them, because you will never get them to trust you. But even if you are a loved one, this is ultimately on the conspiracy theorist. They're the one who has some kind of emotional sickness driving them into these beliefs, and they're the one who can cure themselves. If they refuse to engage, no one else can save them. And you are up against a lot. Almost certainly too much. A whole world of profit-driven, attention-maximizing algorithms are shoveling trash into their brains 16 hours a day, and a global fascist movement is drafting them into an imaginary war of good versus evil. You're just one person, even if you're the most important person in their life. So, you might be able to help. Probably not, and probably not entirely, but you might. Paranoid extremism is dangerous. Even if they don't intend it, engaging with a conspiracy theorist puts you at risk for basically every kind of abuse, and if a conspiracy theorist is at all abusive, you should not try to help them. You cannot help them. You need to protect yourself from them as much as possible. Mental emotional abuse is probably the most common type with constant rants and insults, but physical abuse is also possible. Multiple paranoid extremists have murdered family members over their delusions, and many more have murdered innocent strangers. Take very seriously any threats of violence or possibility of violence with access to weapons. Also likely is financial and medical abuse. Conspiracy theorists are every con's favorite mark, and there are plenty of stories on QAnon casualties of them cashing out on their retirement to buy gold, giving their money to grifters, or spending their savings on prepping supplies. And there are almost as many stories about them poisoning themselves or others, including children, with quack cures. Being financially tied to them or under their care is a constant risk. If you think you're in a situation like this, then the most important thing to do is to protect yourself and to find help. The National Domestic Abuse Hotline, as well as friends and family who can give you shelter, are the best resources. But even if you aren't in a threatening situation, there is the question of whether it's worth it. You have a life to live, and you can't be responsible for someone else choosing to cling to dangerous delusions, especially when engaging with them will demand so much of you. In all cases, you should only move forward with boundaries that make things manageable for you. Know what you can and can't tolerate. Let them know what you won't tolerate, make it clear what'll happen if they ignore that boundary, such as cutting contact for a while or gray rocking, and follow through if they do. Of course, you may not have much choice. If you're here, it's probably someone very close to you who has been, or will be, a big part of your life for a long time, if not forever. A parent, a child, a spouse, probably someone you've already taken responsibility for, and someone you don't want to lose. But they need to not want to lose you too. If their delusion is to the point that they no longer care about being in your life, or you being in theirs, they're too far gone. You aren't a close loved one anymore. You can't get them to trust you, and you have no path to undoing their totalitarian certainty. So, in the end, it's your choice, and it's a choice you'll make every day if you haven't already. If you choose to help someone out of paranoid extremism, you have to be ready for it. You're treating someone who is sick with an addiction, a literal addiction with dopamine surges in their brain and everything. And the point of the sickness is that they don't think they're sick and don't want to be helped. As one Redditor put it, you'll need the patience of Jesus Christ himself. Though, to be fair, as another put it, even Jesus started flipping tables in the temple. Everything I've done with my dad, everything you can do with a conspiracist in your life, is contained in one brilliantly genius post on QAnon casualties that is burned into my brain forever. Maybe that's true, but this is a phrase I have used, reused, remade, and remixed dozens of times talking with my dad for the past year. It's almost all that I've done. Really, it's the perfect way to condense jujitsu persuasion into one all-purpose conversational tool, and I'll try to show you how I use it and what it can do for you. If your conspiracy theorist says this, you might say, maybe that's true, but do you remember when you were worried about giving Grandpa the flu? You knew that we had to keep him safe even if we couldn't see him for Christmas. Maybe that's true, but don't you think people should stick to their commitments? You aren't someone who waits for another person to take care of things for you. Maybe that's true, but if you really want to help children, church has a lot of ways to volunteer for local kids' charities. Maybe that's true, but can we go to a movie or play a game or something so we don't have to keep thinking about this? It's not worth your time. And when my dad said this at our family therapy session, I said, maybe that's true, but I grew up with a dad who taught me that everyone is equal in dignity and moral worth. There's lots of ways that I'm like that dad, both because I didn't have a choice and because I wanted to be, but your website is taking that dad away from me. Maybe that's true, but offers a non-confrontational way to end a conversation's current course and empower yourself to turn the conversation toward where it needs to go. And the place you need to go is to offer alternative solutions, whether big or small, for satisfying their emotional needs. That is, to satisfy their sense of what makes them smart, special, righteous, safe, powerful, accepted by a group they trust. Remember that we all have these same kinds of needs, but we don't all rely on destructive delusions to meet them. They don't have to either. This phrase, and every other way you can paraphrase it or employ it outside of conversation, is the tool that can achieve the most important things you need to do when deprogramming a conspiracy theorist. It doesn't start an argument, and hopefully it ends one, because at no point in the process of deprogramming a conspiracy theorist should you argue with them. Remind yourself here that they don't believe in their conspiracy theories as logical, rationally consistent beliefs. They're a security blanket, and arguing will only backfire as an attack that makes them feel more insecure. It keeps a line of communication open. If the conspiracy theorist doesn't have you and others like you trying to engage with them in a positive, constructive way, all they'll have is the people who feed their paranoia. You need to try to be there for them, always accepting them as much as you can manage while others rightfully reject them, and this phrase gives you a way to make conversation with them more bearable and maybe even helpful. It doesn't judge or reject them. Where telling them they're wrong or arguing with them will just make them dig in to fight back, giving them a non-committal concession helps diffuse their instinct to resist rejection, to resist shame. It ignores the specific theories, the lower-order justifications for the conspiracy theorist's totalitarian certainty. These are just frustrating distractions that the conspiracy theorist doesn't even consistently believe and will constantly contradict. You should just ignore them and spend the time that you would be arguing on more constructive conversation. It moves the goalposts. If you ever manage to debate a conspiracy theorist into conceding a specific theory, All they'll do is move the goalposts back toward their totalitarian certainty. So just do it for them. Save everyone's time by making the conversation about what it should be about anyway. Again, this is not a way to attack them. You're not doing this to call them out for how terrible they are or to dismiss their beliefs as emotional delusions. The point is to always offer them something else. You're guiding them toward a more productive way to meet their need, even if that way is just a distraction, like Wordle. This technique goes beyond conversation, though, and being creative about how to constantly reapply it can keep it going a long way. For example, if your conspiracy theorist is old, doesn't really understand technology, and is just kind of passively being fed that high of indignation from Steve Bannon's podcast or Fox News or Facebook, you should try to cut off their access to it. Those are all shameless, grifting drug pushers that artificially manufacture insecure emotional needs in our family and friends, mostly fearful bigotry. So blocking websites, canceling subscriptions, and replacing them with better sources and interests can do wonders. I helped make a whole book about that, actually. It's about rebuilding a relationship of trust, and that's at least 90% of the struggle. The hard part is understanding why and how it works. That's why I've now spent about 10,000 words on it in the last 2 essays alone, but I think it's worth it, because beyond the patience of Jesus Christ himself, you need a finely honed intuition for what comes after the but. Every person, every relationship, every conversation is going to be different, and each difference will be subtle. The only way to have a chance at getting through to them is to deeply understand why they believe what they do, why they trust who they do, and to carefully tailor each maybe that's true but to draw them closer to something else and better. If it works, and again, it probably won't, but if it does, you'll be able to tell not necessarily because they say they no longer believe the conspiracy theories. Saying that out loud, or even admitting it to themselves, would cause shame, the fear of which is the whole problem. Instead, they will probably be more like Ellen. Ellen Cushing was a teenage conspiracy theorist. Now she writes and edits about conspiracy theories for The Atlantic. The story of how she got out, so to speak, isn't really a story, though. It has a beginning, when a high school teacher told her that the Illuminati secretly ruled the world, but her college years are hardly a middle, and the end happened among everything else without her even noticing. She didn't get out of it. She grew out of it. Ellen was an angsty teen who wanted to have special knowledge about the world that made her interesting. She wore conspiracism as an identity that fulfilled her emotional need, like she might have done with goth makeup or a grunge collection, and she left it behind in adulthood, like she might have done the others. There was never an aha moment of clarity. There wasn't even a conscious decision, really. What she, and every other recovered conspiracy theorist was really doing was feeling less. She was feeling her angsty teenaged emotional need less as she matured. And I think that is literally the same thing as believing in conspiracy theories less. This isn't to say that there aren't dramatic moments of realization for those who are coming out of conspiracy belief, but when there are, it's probably paired with an equally dramatic emotional reckoning. But your conspiracy theorist might start to actively doubt conspiracy theories as they're deprogrammed. It'll be a miracle if they do, but if it does, you need to encourage it, lavishly, without even a hint of condescension or judgment. This is when you start to gently debunk the conspiracy theories. Not when they insist that they're true, but when they start to question the theories themselves. Because debunking here is not an argument you make against them to prove them wrong, but an argument you give them when they start to want it. In fact, probably the best way to debunk them is to let them do it themselves through the Socratic method. When they start to become less anxious, angry, and obsessive around you, they will be more receptive to gentle questioning of their beliefs. Janessa Goldbeck tweeted a good example of this, and you can use questions like this to express genuine, non-confrontational curiosity to someone who is hopefully ready to indulge it. You need to help them feel the same emotional satisfaction they were seeking in the delusions, but through their doubts instead. They need an invitation to be accepted back into the community of trust, of healthy skepticism that is bigger and broader than the small community of cynical grievance. A part of that invitation might be finding professional help for them. A good therapist who has experienced deprogramming psychological addictions is a great resource for working out their insecurities and channeling them toward a better solution. It was vital for my own dad, and I think one of our biggest obstacles is that I haven't been able to convince him to keep seeing the therapist we met. Now, if they're coming back, they will probably relapse at some point. They're going to compulsively crave the high that the conspiracy theories give them, and there's plenty of things that'll push them off the wagon, especially anything that excites their insecurities. When that happens, it doesn't mean it's over. If they manage to get part of the way back before, they can do it again. You just need patience. Do they deserve any of this? No. They've probably said and done terrible things that people should judge them for, and they aren't owed any patience or care. But none of this is about what anyone deserves. No one, living or dead, has ever gotten what they deserve. It's just the only way you can have them back. You need to help them find what they need. And that's probably you. While I was writing this essay, I got an email from my dad about anti-vaccine stuff, you know. I should have been better about sticking to my own advice, but things have been kind of not great with him for the past couple weeks, so I argued a bit in the response, even though I knew it was pointless. But then he actually changed the subject himself. He told me that he had tried playing the violin again. His parents made him learn how to play the violin when he was a kid, and he told me how much he hated it, like his violin was stained with tears, like really sad stuff. But it did kind of end up being one of his most valuable skills. The thing I like telling people most about my dad is that he actually used to be a professional rock country fiddle player. He even toured across the country once, but it wasn't very well publicized and the band was kind of a disappointment, so that was basically like a ceiling on how big he would get. He probably hadn't played in public for like at least 5 years, probably more than that. And he told me that he had gone to Campus Town to just play on a street corner to see what happened. And he made over $50 in tips, so I think he still got it. And he said in the email, "I'm working on reviving my playing. I think it'll be good for my soul." So I wrote back saying, "I remember how many people would come up to you at the grocery store or something to say how much they loved your playing. It wasn't just being good at the violin, it was being good at music. There's something in us worth cultivating, so you should totally do that." I hope so. This essay was about helping the conspiracy theorists you love. The people who lead the global movement of paranoid extremist fascism deserve none of your patience or your mercy, and if you want to know more about that, you can watch part 3.